Hello, everyone. I'm Mike, your friendly cyberbroker leftover, community manager, and one of the co-hosts for tonight.
I'm Merk, your co-host for tonight, DJ and fellow DJ.
I'm Dot. I'm going to claim the title of DGen as well, and I'm just here from the writers' room.
Hi, I'm LoLo. I'm also from the writers' room, and Lost Paradigms Maxi, Merc Appreciator, and shout out to the king of community, Elvis or Carl. Thanks for having us.
Elvis the King.
And hi, I'm Brianna. I am the marketing and operations associate at CyberBrokers. I also help manage the writers' room which has Dot and Lolo in it.
So great to have three guests tonight, and I can't wait. I've been waiting for 8 episodes to get to this particular one, so I can't wait to have conversations. Let me get my stuff done first. So, welcome to the 8th in a series of lore listening parties, an opportunity for those that are new to learn more about the lore storyline that is the foundation of cyberbrokers. For the rest, an opportunity to catch up, re-enjoy the richness of the lore chapters. Each event will have special hosts, not ghosts. And after the chapter is done, we'll switch into community mode. We'll bring up members of the audience who would like to ask questions or share their own personal thoughts about the lore. While we're listening, you can also post questions in CB General in Discord in case you don't want to come up. At the very end, there'll be quick announcements and then instructions on how to get entered into the giveaway. You can find past recordings on Twitter for a couple weeks and permanently now on a new CyberBrokers YouTube channel. So tonight, we're going back to Chapter 8, which was released directly between Quest 3 and Quest 4. In the last chapter, we found out shaDAO had somehow infiltrated or initiated a Failsafe Alpha on Spice's compound. This effectively shut it completely down, including kicking everyone out of the TPL. Zinc and Ken got help from a mysterious person, we still don't know much about them, and raced to save Spice. And that's where we left off. So a few questions to start off with for those that are special guests from the writers' room. How can shaDAO affect the real world? And, well, I'll just ask that question first. How does shaDAO have that level of control?
Well, and I think we'll figure this out. I don't want to get too ahead of it, but there are hints scattered throughout the lore that shaDAO has been around for a very long time, since basically the inception of the paradigm. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that they would have influences outside of the paradigm through drifters.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, there we go. If you check my pinned tweet up there, there's like a link to the shaDAO dossier as well. And so this is kind of like a dossier of just little bits of information that have been collected on shaDAO. And it would appear that they've been, creating influence for a while. How exactly do they have the ability to trigger a Failsafe Alpha? I mean, that's a really good question. It's like they're pretty connected. That would be why.
Yeah, I think that perhaps the realistic world impact of this is the pronunciation debate between shaDAO and shaDAO, tearing Grand Canyon-sized rifts in the writers' room, with Mags and the shaDAO purists privileging accuracy and distinction over the Blood Oath bandits who just think shaDAO is easier and cooler.
shaDAO, yeah.
But if getting kicked out of TPL is any indication, the lines between real world and virtual space or metaverse they're just even more blurred. Like, despite the antique language choices that are like lagging behind the changes, like the TPL still feels more real to all of its participants. They'd rather spend their time there than in dusty cities, like staring at skyscrapers. So it's like the impact is definitely huge.
And a question we might want to ask is anyone in the writer's room in shaDAO/shaDAO?
Oh, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a shadow apologist. I don't want to give away too much, but there's definitely infiltrations in all elements of the writer's room.
I never thought about that. So someone has to take the position of shaDAO to represent it in the writer's room. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we can't give away too much about their motivations and the things like that we have to work through. But
Yeah, blood oath.
yeah, blood oath, right? But I mean, if we're gonna make an antagonist, it's gonna be cool.
I can help with the pronunciation. We've had this particular discussion on community spaces at least 3 times, and the community consensus is it's shaDAO, not shadow.
Yeah, I remember reading through that, and I wanted to just kind of like go with the community, especially because it's kind of fun, like SHA, like, you know, like SHA and DAO. They're both kind of crypto terms.
I just took
Yeah.
what Robin started calling it supermassive.
He would be the decider at the end of the day, like when he says
What-
it in that awesome accent.
Exactly.
Becomes law.
What is his pronunciation? I don't even remember.
shaDAO.
The dulcet decider. Yeah.
There
Well, I
you
mean,
go.
maybe, yeah. It's perhaps not fork worthy, but it's still a rift. Either way, I think that there's an interesting element to the name Sybil and the 51% attack that's occurring. That's just like perhaps brings up questions of shaDAO's reach.
Whoa, LoLo, Sybil is on the compound. Yeah, and she may be with shaDAO. I never really put that connection together. So Sybil being the kind of compatriot of and co-worker of Spice.
Yeah, it could just be a coincidence.
Okay, let's not start rumors that we can't back up here. So let's twist the conversation a little bit. We didn't really get to talk about this last time, but now that we're here, this is kind of the first chapter where the direction was totally decided during a quest. So the quest happened, holders voted, and this chapter was the result of it. So there was actually 2 other chapters, I'm assuming, that were written as outcomes.
Yeah, indeed. Yes. So are you talking about the when they pitched Ken and his weekends to the wolves?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, there's real stakes in the TPL. The community has control of like the destinies and futures of these characters.
Okay, so after we finish this chapter and chat a little, I'd love to hear what the other options were.
Yeah, we can go into it later, but basically Chris was determined to have the community throw someone under the bus. And this was kind of like Dot was saying, proving to the community that their decisions actually do impact the story and have a big impact. And this decision impacted and has influenced all the chapters since then, and how we've just reworked just how the characters interact with each other and the storyline. So definitely be particular when you're voting on anything in the CyberBrokers community.
And it set the bar for the writer's room because there was the expectation that this would be a bit soul crushing to realize that you really have like the fate of a character in the community's hands. But no, they were just like let him go and let's not look back. And so we now in the writer's room, that's actually like an evaluation of you know, they've got the taste for blood in our community a little bit. There's a little bit of cold-bloodedness. So it's like, oh, it could go dark.
Yeah, I don't think we realized there was so much anti-Ken sentiment. Like, I just remember we're shooting in everyone's comments into the writer's room, being like, oh my God, like, the Ken slander is insane right now. So it's also really cool from, like, a writing perspective to kind of have, like, your pulse on, like, how the community is feeling about a storyline and then be able to also have that influence where we take it, beyond just even the decisions you make, but just like the sentiment of the community. I know we're always like trying to keep our finger on that, and it's really fun writing from that perspective as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even though it sort of raises the stakes, and because for us, like, you'll fall in love with a particular strand that you hope gets voted, and perhaps push for it. But yeah, there's so many different like retrospectives we could do, going back and like saying, what if someone else took the fall here? It could change, a lot of the future relationships that were developed, and romances, fights, betrayals. So each of those choices is going to have like a lot of ramifications, but that's the fun part for sure.
Okay, so there's one issue that I have about all this, and there were 2 voting points. So a vote occurred during the quest while a lot of people were at NFT NYC, and it was overwhelmingly throw Ken out of the bus, right? Not too long after that, there was a Twitter poll, and it became tied between Ken and Zinc. I mean, literally 50-50. So how did we get these 2 different answers out of Ken versus Zinc?
I guess because some of us pro Ken people were partying it up in NFT NYC, and just let the community in the Discord just destroy Ken. Just kick him right into the bad guys.
I've seen a lot of people change their mind too, though, on Ken. I like to think that, I think maybe once we threw him to the wolves, that some people started to think, oh, is he really that bad? I don't know.
That's a good point. So people's decisions changed over time.
Oh, that's a sweet thought.
Yeah, and sort of after voting for a certain decision and seeing the outcome and seeing how the character handles it, opinions definitely change, right? And some of their like endearing qualities, or like when they show empathy towards each other, when just a chapter or 2 ago all they were doing was talking shit. It's like, oh, okay, they care about each other, so they should matter.
Okay, so if the writer's room knew the outcomes, but they didn't know which one was going to get picked, did people in the writer's room have their favorite outcomes? And were they disappointed when it didn't get picked?
No, that was it. I was just gonna say, yeah. I mean, I had my favorite, so I was disappointed.
And
I'll say LDH does a pretty good job of trying to make sure that the beloved ideas make it in there one way or another, right? Even if it can't in the exact way we want it, like, it's going to get cataloged or archived and
Oh my
revisited,
gosh.
hopefully. So
Yes, I don't know if everybody who's here needs to know how much LDH just like swings in and saves the day. I think even today, I was like, hey, where do I find this one thing? And she's like, right here. She just keeps track, or she'll be able to call back to the conversation when we're like, did somebody mention that? She'll say, yeah, Merck said that here. It's amazing. And it really keeps us on track.
like the following 3 people 100 emoji did. Yeah, it's meticulous. It's great.
we've got a giant writer's room Google Drive going on. So I think this decision was super interesting because it didn't necessarily like the 2 versions of the chapter after this weren't that crazy, right? A lot of this was like the setup. But this obviously had so many impacts on all the chapters that follow. And I think the writers, like, we had to kind of, once we knew who was gone, that also impacted, okay, like, so it's now Spice and Zinc, like, what is their dynamic going to be? And then eventually we're going to introduce a new character, and we're like, okay, now how does she fit into this whole dynamic? So this was a very interesting decision because it really impacted, I think, the character side of the story the most rather than the action. And I don't know, I think in a really good sci-fi story, it's the the characters and the personalities add like the heart to it that you really want. So the community really impacted kind of the social aspect of this whole story moving forward. And eventually, once this is over, we'll be able to go back and point to you, okay, like, because you threw Ken under the bus, this happened, this happened, this happened. But we still have to hold a few things close to our chest for now.
Yeah, and then there's the other side of it too. It's like being basically in the house of the enemy that's something that the character that Ken is, he's going to deal with that in a completely different way and behave, and he's going to have a completely different storyline in that situation than Zinc's going to have in that situation, because they're incredibly different types of men or AI.
With that, Merc, cue us up.
CyberBrokers, how a paradigm shift became the paradigm lost. Project Paradigm, Chapter 8, Bruises. Ken hunched over as the boom of a grenade shook and echoed throughout the large storage facility. The force of the explosion slammed him into the side of the truck where he'd been taking cover. It took a couple of ticks for Ken's senses to return, and he instantly leaned around the truck's trailer to lay covering fire across the several squads that were trying to close in on them. "I nearly got it," Zinc shouted from the driver's seat, where he had dismantled the steering panel and was reprogramming the power distributor. They'd achieved what they came to do: sneak inside and destroy the device that was keeping Spice out of TPL. A strangely powerful and custom-built machine capable of inducing a Failsafe Alpha across her IRL compound. At least, that was the theory, based on the information a stranger had given them. Only now, however, surrounded by guards and gunfire, did they realize that the infiltration had been the easy part. Beneath the sound of bullets ricocheting off concrete and embedding themselves in the metal of the trucks around them, Ken heard the engine beside him roar to life. "Get in," Zinc shouted, hands already at the wheel. "We got a new problem," Ken yelled back over his shoulder, still firing. "The gates are closing." Zinc leapt down to look. A few seconds later, another grenade's blast wave shook the courtyard, forcing them both to drop to the floor. "The security room!" Zinc pointed at the glass-protected space atop the flight of metal stairs 2 mercenaries were currently using as cover to rain gunfire down upon them. Those 2 must have shut the gates from there. "Get back in the truck," unironic Ken commanded. He stood up and started running. "I'll take care of them and get the gates open." "What? No, I'll go!" Zinc cried out as the sharp, burning sensation of a bullet slicing across his shoulder made him grunt. He maintained focus and shouted, "You won't make it back out!" Ken was already gone, dashing behind another truck to flank the 2 mercenaries. Zinc drew his pistol and fired at them to draw their attention, giving Ken the opportunity to burst out from behind the truck and take them by surprise before he leapt up the staircase. The rush of another explosion startled Zinc. He returned to the truck, intent on getting it moving, aiming its hulking front end at the closed gates. He kept his head low as the hail of bullets rained on the metal chassis like an angry thunderstorm, but managed to catch a glimpse of Ken up in the security room. As the truck rolled forward, building speed, he spotted Ken grasping at some controls. Up ahead, a wall of combatants were firing at the truck as the gates beyond them began to peel apart. For a half tick, Zig felt like Ken might actually escape too, until several enforcers materialized in the room with him, behind the security room glass, and swarmed Ken from all angles. Zinc stomped the truck's accelerator, squeezing every bit of power and speed that the groaning vehicle could muster as it barreled through the chaos. No time for regret, not until he made it out himself. Silhouetted against the dawn, the mech junkyard resembled the black horizon of a battlefield. An abstract painting in ink, pistons and cables broke up the lines of sleek contours and complex machinery. Twisted, grasping mech arms. Weapons protruded with pointed intensity. Brutish armor bore dents as unique and personal as bruises. Spice sat on the toppled frame of a butterfly engine, watching the sky turn from purple to orange. The emerging light gradually picked out details from the piles of broken hardware. The sunrise stirred something profoundly emotional in her, a sense of time that didn't exist outside TPL anymore. In her underground compound, the lights were either on or off, binary. You had to be a machine to survive in real life, and it was only in the machine that you could feel this human. Come on, she huffed through gritted teeth, yanking a sensor loose from the engine beneath her and twirling it by the singed wires to distract from her own thoughts. She'd rushed back through the snowdrifts to the compound, and upon discovering the Failsafe Alpha was over, she had plugged straight into her rig, ready for action, but instead here, waiting. She hated waiting. It always made her think too much. Wasn't the point of TPL to stop that? Beyond the junkyard, Era Novum was quiet now, the chaos subsiding into an uneasy sense of emptiness. They're probably reactivating safe mode wherever they can right now, Spice figured. I'm not so sure that's the end of it, though. An engine sputtered and choked, unseen in the distance, something big and heavy. The metallic rumbling grew louder until Spice realized it was approaching her location. She tossed the sensor aside and jumped down to watch a truck struggle through the open gates. On the rough ground, the heavy vehicle rattled and bounced, squealing and creaking all the way. The chassis was perforated by bullets, the windscreen cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and fluid leaked from the truck. She ran to the driver's side as soon as it stopped. The smoking engine sounded a last pathetic groan before going silent. It took Zinc 2 shoves before he could shunt open the mangled door. He didn't so much dismount as collapse onto Spice. "What happened to you?" she asked, helping the wincing injured man stand up. Zinc looked at her, a half-smile buried beneath his pain. "I think I cracked a rib, twisted my ankle, broke my wrist, and got my shoulder grazed by a bullet, but otherwise, I've never felt better. Enough about me, though. It's good to see you. Stay here. I'm going to get a nurse." "No." Zinc grabbed Spice's arm, stopping her from stepping away. "Don't worry about me." His emphasis on the word was all Spice needed to decipher the serious look on his face. "Where's unironic Ken?" "After you sent him that message, we met up. Someone calling himself the moderator messaged him soon after. I don't know who they really are, but they helped us figure out the Failsafe Alpha in your compound was caused by a device held in an old factory owned by shaDAO. We managed to break in and destroy it." "shaDAO? Isn't that some defunct investment company?" Zinc let out a tired laugh. "No, not an investment company, not a transport company, not a little-known holding company that nobody has ever heard of. shaDAO is... Well, how about I just show you?" Zinc moved to the back of the truck, still clutching his side. Spice followed and helped when he struggled with the truck doors. They swung open, and Spice jumped up to inspect the large boxes in the back. Whoa, mech heads. She lifted the lid from one of the huge boxes. Factory-fresh Ravagers, Behemoths, even Nexus tier. They already calibrated these to control a whole army's worth of weaponry. Zinc, this stuff isn't easy to come by. That's why I asked you to wait for me here. I know the mechanic who owns this place. She'll hide them for us. Imagine thousands of those things, though. The base was full of them. Thousands? But this stuff is expensive. Yeah, well, we definitely paid a pretty heavy price for it. Spice stared down at Zinc from inside the trailer of the truck. "Where is Ken?" she said, this time making it sound like a demand more than a question. Zinc took a deep breath. He didn't make it out. Demezed. I don't know. Those guys seem more like the hold captive and torture type. Spice jumped down from the truck and began walking towards the gate. She shoved off Zinc's hand when he tried to hold her back this time, forcing him to speed up his limp to keep up with her. "Spice, hold up," he called as she marched to the gates. "You find a nurse," she said, swiping fingers across her bracer to bring up Ken's prior locations. "You'd only slow me down in your state anyway." "Spice, listen to me for a tick." "Damn it, Ken," she muttered into her bracer and stopped in her tracks. "Why didn't you share your logs?" Spice rounded back on Zinc. "Where is this base?" Zinc grunted from the sudden stop, the exertions on his injuries weighing on him. "They weren't some small-scale chem smuggling drifter kit operation, Spice. We only got in because the moderator helped us, and they've probably doubled the security now. Besides, I figure they've jumped Ken several nodes away by now." "So what exactly am I supposed to do?" Spice asked, exasperated. Play some video games while I wait for him to escape from the goon squad on his own? If you want him back, we have to learn more about shaDAO. Zinc looked over at the open truck and shook his head. Asherah, but I'm starting to think if we want the paradigm to even continue existing, we need to learn more about shaDAO.
And there we have it, front and center. Zinc and Ken accomplished their goal. They got Spice back into the TPL and got rid of Failsafe Alpha, but Ken didn't make it out. Oh, I don't even know where to start. I don't have any questions yet. I'm going to let you guys pick a moment and start with it.
Okay, well, like what? Oh, go ahead, Lolo. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Okay. All right. Well, two things stand out to me. One is that the partnership of Ken and Zinc, like as an odd couple working together, is like it's written well because it's so messy. Like they have all these arguments over who does what. They definitely like aren't in sync or like executing this like perfect, back to back dance as they like enter and infiltrate, which isn't really surprising if you think about the recent debate over leftover versus talented brokers, like being called a junk band and stuff. Like you really wouldn't expect them to be able to just go in, partner, and execute really well. But on the other side, Ken and Zinc like peeking together, baiting for each other to like flank the two mercs. Like they clearly have some great FPS training, like Valorant, Counter-Strike. Their reflexes are there. They know what they're doing with their weapons. Ken did end up getting captured, and I've heard quite a few theories on where he went, and I'll let Dot take it from there.
Yeah, well, one thing so the question about where did Ken go when he got captured is to shill hell. Basically, it's just a room where you have to answer emails or rather Twitter DMs saying that you won a whitelist opportunity from that's his in his dungeon where he has to all of the junk projects he's been whitelisted to.
That fits with our space, no question about it.
No, but in all seriousness, okay, so these are some things I really like, and I think this is Johnny. Something I kind of want to point out, just because I thought it was really well written, was the passage where Spice is appreciating a sunrise or sunset and watching the sky turn colors while she's waiting for this, and just having that moment of peace, and how that's drawn to the fact that she does not have that in the real world. Everything in the real world is binary, and so here's a human being who has a real life, quote unquote real life, and there's just that dichotomy drawn of her real life really is in the TPL. It's the only existence of that sort of beautiful capture of the world that is kind of makes us all feel human, and that her life, the life in the real world, has become something like a machine. So I thought that was really well written. I really enjoyed reading that when it was written. And the other thing I want to point out is what shaDAO is trying to do, which is that they're really trying to exert some control here. And what that would mean for somebody like Spice, where essentially your world is being created by the virtual existence. So for somebody to be able to control the truth of that existence and what's happening, what's recorded, as true, how big of stakes that is for people that are essentially their real world has become this virtual world. So those stakes are really starting to come into view about what shaDAO is trying to do, or shaDAO.
Yeah, and in the dossier that Dot has in the tweet up above, like we tried to kind of scatter that in there for the questers to kind of infer, like this idea that like shaDAO has been a long time coming. They've been planning this for a while, and they've kind of just been, thrown into this havoc of Ken is gone now, but now they also have to deal with this idea that they know that shaDAO is trying to do something. And again, this is their home. Like, it's Spice's home just as much as it is the brokers. And I like Dot said, I just think Johnny did a really good job of, I think, prefacing how much the paradigm means to Spice right before kind of we raise these stakes of like, oh, okay, this is the bad guy. This is who we're up against. Like, and again, we'll start to see kind of hints of this. Like, why didn't they want brokers to know they were AI? Like, there's all these questions that we're still going to have to answer later on. But these are where the layers start coming in of the conflict in the paradigm.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It's a bunch of opposites, so we probably connect with Spice and real world, but the reality is Spice connects with TPL the way we connect with the real world, because that's where she experiences things that we think of as the real world, because those are gone for her in her reality. Interesting.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and then that also that just like feel that for a moment, how when you're watching in our day and age, when you're watching television and you can tell, or you're reading, social media, and you can tell that there's hands pulling the strings of what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're feeling. You feel that pressure to see the world a certain way. And if everything that was materializing around you was being controlled in these well-meaning but overly controlling ways, what kind of how much more effective and dangerous that type of situation is for people to be trying to vie for that kind of control.
The other thing that came in here was mechs. So there was a lot of description of mech pieces, and that she was in a junkyard full of mech pieces, and then all of a sudden we have a truck full of new mech pieces. It almost feels like a little foreshadowing for what's coming up. Is that fair?
If you pay attention in the lore, we always sneak kind of little hints of, these mech parts all throughout. So if you pay attention when you're reading, it's something we're really conscious about. And again, you guys are building these mechs, and we want you to feel like you're building them along with the story. These are all really conscious things that we're thinking about when we're writing it. It's all very purposeful. So you're definitely right to notice. And you'll see this now moving forward in the following chapters with the other parts as well.
Yeah, because the quest reward was the mech heads.
Yeah, I mean, Spice's mech was like one of the most cool early chapter pieces that people wanted to know more about, and they're gigantic, right? So it's like really somewhat difficult to even understand, like the truckload of pieces of a mech are still like really, really large, like thinking of like a 18-wheeler hauling a wind turbine down the interstate sort of like size pieces. And so any organization trying to get their hands on a number of those is either full of Olympic pride or up to something.
Okay, let's finish this out, because we're going to have lots more questions at the end of this. Merc, could you queue up the second part for us?
What do you mean? Well, the information is still on Ken's bracer, but from what the moderator gave us, it looks like shaDAO is making a final push for 51% control. Impossible. Spice bit back a laugh at the absurdity. TPL's too big for anyone to get that much power without someone noticing. Zinc raised a finger at her. Without someone noticing, that's the thing. It's all in Ken's bracer from the info dump the moderator gave us. How shaDAO operates through these shell companies, puts their people in powerful positions, leans on politicians, and controls back-end infrastructure like the jump stations. But 51% of the paradigm. Do you really doubt it, Spice? We just found out brokers are AI after, over 2 centuries? They're stockpiling thousands of mech parts now. It's like they're preparing for war, probably looking to make the final push. And it looks like it's going to be a violent one. Spice rubbed her face with a palm and sighed, overloaded by the magnitude of it all. Or maybe it's just something to do with the upcoming Mech Olympics, she said, with empty optimism. And maybe sending half an army to try and blow us up was a clerical error, he sighed. They kicked you out of TPL, Spice. It doesn't get bigger than influencing the real world from within the paradigm, right? The fact none of us knew any of this about shaDAO doesn't mean they're harmless. It's a testament to how effective they really are. Spice paced on the dirty, rough ground of the junkyard, trying to put all the broken pieces in her mind together in search of something hopeful, something upon which to build her resolve. Despite her focus, in her periphery, she noticed Zinc watching her with something more than concern in his expression, something intimate and unfulfilled, and entirely unrelated to what they were talking about. Okay, she jerked her head, motioning him to follow. Let's go. Where? Ken's apartment. 5 blocks later, they had hailed a couple of monowheels and sped along the elevated rails that swirled through the city. The trip afforded them a bird's-eye view of the night's aftermath. The buildings, no longer on fire, were charred and skeletal now. Smashed windows and doors hung like broken teeth over voids beneath. The adverts on electronic billboards glitched, broing like glowing pastiches of their former selves. There were few people around now, this early in the morning, and those they saw scuttled and ran as if the daylight might bring about justice for their sins. When they finally entered Ken's apartment, Spice made a beeline for the arcade machine, while Zinc took in the playful decor. We probably shouldn't hang around too long, Zinc said. shaDAO might send some guys here. I wish they would. Spice deftly flicked the arcade stick. Zinc watched her play the game for a few seconds. Well, okay. He clutched his side, looking around the apartment. Since you've decided to play video games, after all, I'm going to check if this guy has any chems that'll make my continued living a little less painful than it is at the moment. Cow! Spice shrieked triumphantly. Zinc stopped to watch her pump her fist, then bang away at something on her brazier. Cow? Man, you drifters come up with the goofiest slang sometimes. C-O-W, Spice spelled, glancing up for a second, grinning. Unironic Ken had a Spectre friend. He never told me much about them, but he did mention once that they were a killer at this arcade machine. The realization hit Zinc. So you pulled the name they put into the high score table. And now I'm looking through the Alpha Command database to find a Spectre it might fit. Well, ain't you as smart as a contract? Not Contus Oxide, can't be Crusade the Knotted or Wire Castro, Rocky Circuit Mesa? No, that's it. Catch of Wolf, C-O-W, their initials. It's got to be her. I'm sending a message. Okay, hold on. Zinc nodded towards the screen. You're not going to just announce to some Spectre you think maybe knows Ken that he's been captured by shaDAO, right? I'm not stupid, Zinc. She finished with a final tap to her bracer and looked back to Zinc. I'm just going to ask Catch if she's heard from him. So now we wait to hear back from them. What do you want to do in the meantime? Take your clothes off. Zinc raised an eyebrow. Spice laughed. So I can patch up your wounds. Zinc had only just undone the collar of his top when Spice's bracer pinged again. She checked it quickly, then started moving to the door. Actually, keep them on. We're meeting her in 10 blocks. But I'm wounded, Zinc said, his hands still lifted over his head. But she was already gone. He let his arms slump and followed her. The meeting spot Catch had given Spice was the rooftop green space of a tech ed complex, just a short walk away. They emerged from the stairwell and looked around. There were only a couple of vehicles in this quiet, unremarkable corner of the city. So boring, even the graffiti artists didn't bother with it. The precise spot a Spectre would love. Eventually, they found her sitting on the hood of a red, wedge-shaped sports car. A morning breeze weaved through her white, ethereal clothes in a way that made it seem as if she might float away. Around them, the city was waking up. Skyscraper glass and steel beginning its gleam. The stream of hovercars flinging themselves between the buildings growing larger by the tick. Down the street, a bug-shaped vehicle hovered beside the cratered edge of a bridge as it performed repairs. Spice, called Catch of Wolf as soon as they were within earshot. Unironic Ken's told me a lot about you. The comment took Spice off guard for a tick. Maybe it was the way Catch had said it. Spice quickly put it down to the weirdness of Spectres. They always seemed to know more than they let on, and interpreted more than they heard. This is Zinc. Catch nodded a curt greeting. She had quick, assessing eyes and the relaxed manner of someone who was 3 steps ahead of everyone. So, what happened? Zinc cleared his throat. Spice's compound got kicked, and we found it was caused by a device at some facility. So Ken and I busted in to destroy it. We succeeded, except only I managed to bust back out. What kind of facility? Zinc shrugged. Some old factory in the industrial district. A fenced-in place opposite the south jump station there. All we know is that shaDAO was using it. The place was full of mech parts. shaDAO? Catch repeated, visibly tensing up for a moment. You sure about that? Zinc nodded. That's not a name you want to be throwing around. Catch paused a tick. People who do tend to get disappeared. I'm not afraid of getting demezed, Zinc said. No, I didn't say demezed, she replied, looking directly at him to emphasize her point. Disappeared. Gone. 0 trace, off-chain, no respawns. I could tell you a dozen rumors about why, but at least most of them are fairy tales, and even I'm not sure which. The sway of solemn silence lingered among the 3 of them. Spice finally blew a strand of hair from her face. So where do we start looking for Ken? You don't do anything except forget you ever heard the name shaDAO, Catch said. Leave it to me. I'll let you know if I find anything. I thought you said Ken told you a lot about me. Spice crossed her arms. If he did, you'd know that I'm not going to just stand by and wait, shaDAO or not. Catch looked up at her and broke into a slow smile. She glanced at Zinc, wrinkled her nose, then returned her gaze to Spice. Okay, Cat sighed, but you better forget my name too. The second you leave this parking garage, I'll find you if I want an update. Of course, Zinc nodded. Catch stood to leave, then appeared to change her mind. I've got a lead, but it might already be cold. Something went down a little while ago in Magnetic. Some fisherman or hacker netted more than they bargained for. I don't know what it was, but from the sensation it caused in the information community, I place a pretty big bet that it had something to do with shaDAO. Magnetic? Zinc winced, and not just from the pain. Man, I don't have enough money to even think about Magnetic, let alone go there and start asking questions. You'll have to rely on your good looks and charm, I guess, Catch winked. Besides, you shouldn't be traveling by jump station for now, anyway. Spice and Zinc looked at each other. My mech's still being fixed, Spice said, but we can find our way there. Here. Catch tossed a hardware fob towards them. Zinc lifted his hand, but Spice snatched it out of the air before it reached him. Take the Velocister. It's clean. No trackers, no malware. If you guys want to survive more than 10 blocks chasing shaDAO, you'd better start thinking about such things. I'll go check out that base you mentioned. Catcher Wolves stepped past them towards the stairwell. You sure? Spice said. Catch spun to face them, now walking backwards. It's a bear market. Everything's going cheap now, anyway. They watched her go, looked at the sleek ride, and then at each other, neither able to hide their smile. Spice spoke first. You ready for a road trip?
Okay, so let's get into it.
Title of my memoir.
Where do you want to start on this one?
I just want to say that I love some of these one-liners that Johnny, who is the writer who works on these chapters, has in here. Like, I will literally be reading this, laughing to myself about it. The last line about it being a bear market, everything's going cheap anyway. I just love these fun little one-liners. He always has at least one in every chapter. He's so great at that.
And Easter eggs. There's always these Easter eggs that I think largely go unnoticed by people. Like the Spectre saying I'll find you. That's what Spectres do.
Or
they track you down.
Catch with I've got a lead, but it might already be cold.
Yeah, I think like one of the things in the writers' room we spend a lot of time on is like, especially when we're introducing a new talent. Obviously, every character is going to have their own personality, but like we were saying, this is the first time we're meeting a Spectre in the lore. So we have a lot of conversations about like, what is a Spectre like what is their role in the paradigm, and like this idea that okay, the Spectres have heard of shaDAO, like they're the secret organization that basically no one else has ever heard of, but the Spectres, like they've heard the rumblings. These are all like things that we discuss in the room, and we want to make sure like the first time you're meeting a talent, like you're getting a very good sense of what they do, what their role is, and the type of person, or I guess AI, that typically falls into that talent is like.
Yeah, sign me up for the Spectre spinoff, like the BFF show of Ken and his all-knowing interpreting friend. It's just like, I think that the Spectre is one of the most interesting talents, and the way that the writing is read as well by Supermassive is excellent. Like the personality really comes through, and even through the robot voice, even through shaDAO disrupting the Twitter space, you can still like hear what the Spectre feels and get that vibe.
So it also kind of talks about, it reveals more about Ken, even though Ken isn't in this chapter, because it's talking about, you know, things in Ken's apartment, his connection with a Spectre, which you wouldn't expect from a leftover, right? So you still get flavor of Ken in here, even though he's not in this chapter.
And that's been also like something that I think Johnny's done a really good job with, even in these later chapters. Like Ken hasn't been in a lot of chapters recently, but we're still like trying to have the readers learn about him and know about him. Like he's still very much a character, even though he's not physically present. And like you said, like you're learning more about who he is, and you know, there's more to leftovers than meets the eyes, right?
So who wants to talk about the fact that apparently there's something worse than demezzing?
Not it.
Has this been discussed?
So this is like the first hint we get, right, of where Ken is going to end up. And again, Chris was very conscious in this when we were writing this, that like there needs to be raised stakes, right? Like demezzing is obviously really bad. Like we've stressed that you don't want to be demezzed, but how in a world where you can't really die necessarily, what's worse than that? And this is where we're trying to go with that. Like what are the stakes? Like why do you have to fear shaDAO? Like why do we have to be afraid for Ken? And obviously we're gonna reveal later on kind of at least the name of where Ken is. But the idea that like you're just not, like no one can find you, there's no trace of you, like what's scarier than that in a world where you can kind of you can trace your entire like timeline back.
Narratively speaking, it's really important. Like that, you know, like what are the stakes? Especially once you get into like action and adventure. I think in a narrative there has to be kind of skin in the game. So it's an important part, I think, in a strong like evaluation early on. Early on, that was a big, like a big, what would you call that? Like a big decision or weight. It had a lot of weight in the narrative as a whole.
Yeah, and the writers' room, like we knew kind of like we had a general idea of like, okay, this time, like at the end of this quest, like we're gonna see who gets captured by shaDAO, but like what happens to them after they got captured, that was all something that like we had to go back and forth with again in the writers' room. And like we had to like raise the stakes, like we had to kind of like figure this out. So it makes for some really interesting conversations, like some really good debates, to go back and forth about what would this place be like what is worse again than demezzing. And we're gonna find out later on kind of where we've landed with that, but we're very conscious and kind of like to make sure we're picking through plot holes and making sure everything makes sense within the world. And this was one thing that we really needed, but we had to be really smart about.
Yeah, and those are like some of the most fun moments in the writer's room too. Like I remember J-Tob dropping this sort of like large wall of text about gaming for the most part, right? And like what it would mean to like play like a role-playing game, like if you were like pretending to be a police officer in GTA RP or something, as an example. But his like text was like a large discussion about the types of places that drifters would want to log into, right? Like, and what the rules of that universe need to be. And so those are happening still in the writer's room. Like a lot of it has been ironed out, like a lot of the foundational kind of like rules of the universe, but some of them are still being like debated and discussed. And so it's like a sense of these moments won't last forever, right? Because once it gets decided, we can't roll back and refork those. But there's still like quite a few of these like really big stake decisions that we're still ironing out. And that's like a super fun part of being in the writer's room.
So being a techie, I always need to dissect some of this. And the TPL is basically a blockchain. And, we're talking about nodes and, blocks and all these things. So it makes me question if shaDAO can do something to someone worse than demezzing and erase them. Does shaDAO already have 51% control?
So to answer your question, no, they don't. They can demez someone like you can demez. Everybody can demez people. Samurais can demez a whole legion of drifters at the Merkle tree. So demezzing is something that's like within control. Do you have like a specific example of what makes you feel like they have 51%?
Well, how do you erase something from the blockchain? How do you erase records of what someone did? Going back cycles, as they say.
So they're not necessarily erasing. Like they're not erasing where Ken was. It's just now they can't find the trace of him. And we will kind of talk about later on how this is possible. But to Dot's point, they do not have 51%. That is what we are trying to prevent from happening.
Got it. So we'll get more details on this later. Okay.
Yeah, they basically have like a turbo cache of for they're turbo caching him into.
Okay. Can we hear what the opposite sides of this decision would have been?
You mean like if Zinc had gone and gotten captured by?
Was it only two options? Ken or Zinc were going to get sacrificed? Those are the two options?
Yeah, I think so. That's right, guys? It was Ken and Zinc.
I think so. Well, what I remember at this point being like the most interesting thing about what was going to happen is it was in the context of like writing future chapters and sort of understanding which of these members can be communicating to each other and like how will we develop those characters in that moment. Like how would Ken's character develop if he was captured, and likewise like how would Spice and Zinc react to it, and others that they try to interact with. And so thinking about like what those meetings would look like and how the event of one of them, someone's taking an L, but really they both are. Like even in this world where Zinc, gets out, it's not like he considered it a huge victory. He was really just trying to like protect himself at the end and had no option, but definitely like was interested in saving Ken. So there's a development happening there, and that's like those moments are what we're like really thinking about, I think. Because regardless of what the community decides, we like need to be ready to put different sets of characters together and have them do things that make sense for the story.
Yeah, it was very much more like it's branching, and then what is the fallout, and how are the relationships moving forward from how this is occurring.
It would have been interesting to see how Ken's reaction would have been to losing Zinc. So we got to see Zinc's reaction. And frankly, I think a lot of Zinc haters became enamored with Zinc a little bit in this chapter because like, okay,
You speaking for yourself there?
yeah, possibly, yeah. But but before that, you didn't know much about him. But now through action, you see, okay, he's trying to do the right thing here. He didn't want to leave behind.
Yeah, he expressed some nobility in this chapter for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think I think if Zinc had been the one captured, Ken also would have done the right thing as well. Like I don't think he would have left him out to dry. But again, I think the impacts of this decision, it was very much in the dynamics of the group. And again, we had kind of basic plot points that we kind of had planned out for the rest of this, moving forward, but we couldn't really plan out a lot of these like little things, like the little dynamics, because again, the personalities of Zinc and Ken and the decisions that they would make would be very different. So this decision was very much like, okay, like this is going to impact everything moving forward, the friendships, the romance, the action, like the plans they execute, like the personalities are what's driving this story. And we kind of picked one to kind of put off to the side for a bit. So there definitely still would have been a rescue mission, but again, the difference in Spice's and Ken's relationship and Zinc's and Spice relationship, and then when we bring in a new character as well, like that's kind of what's all in the question right now, and what we had to figure out basically as soon as we figured out what the community had voted for.
And as always, the double sides are there. So in one moment, I'm thinking, okay, Ken's a good guy, but then there's the interaction between the Spectre and Ken, and that doesn't look so good.
Yeah, and Venus isn't here to ask the important question, which is Zinc to be trusted? And he's gaining more and more of it as we go on. But like, at the end of the day, he made it out, right? Like everything's coming up Zinc, even though he does seem to have a real emotional response and feel let down and not wanting Spice to care for his injuries.
Yeah, there's like a whole passage where it's like it goes pretty quickly from like he put that mech truck or that the shipping truck in gear and moved forward pretty quickly. It's like
right, it's like they're swarming. Let's get out of here. Sorry, I have no choice. I have no choice.
He's like, maybe he'll make it out.
No, I think you can get me out. There's room in the truck. No, gotta go.
Yeah, he's like, oh no, I see shaDAO. Guys,
there's that. If that hasn't come out in the Era Novum ledger, it wouldn't surprise me to see that an op-ed, about Zinc's performance. But
that's a good an investigative piece that goes back and looks at the tire marks and evaluates how quickly he moved and got out of there. Yes, perfect.
yeah, exactly. Like calculating the distance, like a good true crime documentary. Like we drove the distance from the compound to the exit. Easily could have made it.
So I have to back up. I apologize. I'm still a little emotional on this whole Ken thing. If anyone wants to come up and ask questions, please raise your hand. You're more than welcome to come up. If you don't want to talk live, feel free to ask questions in CB General. Until then, I'll keep the conversation going. The other thing that kind of struck me here was Ken's apartment. So we get a little more view of Ken's apartment, and the fact that somehow the Spectre has a high score on one of his games implies that Spectre's around a lot.
If you go back to, I think it might be the second chapter, Ken does mention he has a Spectre acquaintance. So we kind of have laid the groundwork earlier on that he's known this person for a while. And we're kind of just introducing them now. But I think the thing with the paradigm is everyone has layers, right? All these brokers, and the drifters, and it's where people live, but I think it's also because it's so fantastical and not like the real world. Like there's like lots of places you can escape in here. And I think this is kind of where we're starting to hint at that. Like there's all these layers to Ken, right? That even Spice might not know about. Everyone has their like different roles in different places they go. And I think too, with Ken being a leftover, we've kind of already hinted at this like hierarchy in the system of leftovers kind of being like they're the biggest talent, like, you know, there's some bias against them. And I think with Ken, like one of the main things of his character is I feel like he's always like having to like kind of prove himself. He's like fighting his way in this world. And again, him getting taken and like how he's going to respond to that is going to be based on kind of his perspective, I think, as a leftover. That's also a conversation we've had a lot too, is how will Ken's, you know, world change based on the fact that he was captured versus how would Zinc's, you know, opinion on the whole thing be.
Yeah, and I love the idea of the arcade game being like the sort of penultimate social indicator or like signed wall of visiting, just like visiting someone in the TPL and you'd be like, oh yeah, this person's clearly friends with this other one that's a master of this game. A really clever way to get that in. And the idea that like, to your point, Carl, of like, if the Spectre has a high score, then they have a robust relationship. I mean, probably it's definitely worth thinking. I mean, maybe the Spectre just like stopped by once, crushed the game because it's easy for them, and hasn't thought about it since. Or maybe they like have a, you know, intense rivalry with Ken on the machine, and like that alone is worth its own episode.
Yeah, and I always need to keep in mind that, you know, the brokers, not only are they 24/7, you know, as far as awake and doing something, but they've had hundreds of years together to form relationships. So what we think of as casual, you know, may have a long history associated with it that hasn't been explored yet.
Yep. 1,000 blocks, 10,000 blocks a week, 100 weeks a cycle, you know, 200 cycles in a lifetime. They're like making friends and doing deals and moving through the TPL.
On the opposite side of that, it interests me because there must be some different type of social dynamic, because you really can't piss someone off in the TPL because they're always going to be there, right? So the fact that shaDAO has somehow kept quiet is quite remarkable, given there's people 24/7 looking around everywhere, right?
100%.
And that's just so dangerous, right? Like that's like why the Spectres like don't say shaDAO. Like they've heard in like the rumblings of the underworld, the paradigm, they've heard the name, but think about the planning and the amount of people and work and time it takes to get 51%. And I think that's something like Spice, we're trying to stress through Spice's dialogue here. Like the paradigm's so big, there's no way. But Zinc is like, I have the proof right here. And that's also why we're kind of like, we're raising the stakes here again. Like this isn't just about Ken anymore. And it's kind of like speculating, what will they do when they got into this 51%? Why are they so secretive about it? It's all these kind of questions we're raising about this secret organization.
And that's another good point. We tend to go off on the Ken versus Zinc discussions, but there's a much more important discussion, which is how are they going to deal with shaDAO? Anything else any of you would like to talk about before we wrap up for the night?
Just thanks for having us. It was super fun.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. I always enjoy this. This is a lot of good times nerding out with you guys.
I always say it's like a CyberBrokers book club. I love just kind of chatting through the lore and talking through the decisions and everything that goes behind all these seemingly little things in the chapters.
And I thank all three of you, LoLo and LDH, as the name is now, for taking the time tonight. I know the community loves hearing all these little extra details and the discussions about things that, as they read it, maybe they didn't catch that particular perspective. So it allows them to enjoy that particular chapter of the lore again. And as always, Merc, thank you for being in the background and making this all happen for us, our tech master and DJ. Thank you all for joining tonight. Another great event. And if we all want to say goodbye and sign off.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Take care. And I'll see you guys at the next one.
Bye.
Good night all.